In the year 1955, a baby boy was born in San Francisco, California. His name was Steve. His biological parents were young and unable to raise him, so they made the difficult decision to place him for adoption. A loving couple, Paul and Clara Jobs, soon adopted the baby and named him Steve Jobs. From a very young age, Steve was different. He was curious not just about people, but about objects, machines, and ideas. He wanted to know how things worked. When he was just a toddler, he would take apart household gadgets, not to destroy them, but to explore their insides. Paul, his adoptive father, noticed this curiosity and encouraged it. He wasn't a rich man, but he believed in teaching Steve through hands-on experience. Steve's early years were filled with questions. Why does this do that? How does this connect? Why can't it be better? These questions would later define his life. The Jobs family home had a small garage, nothing special at first glance, but to young Steve, it was a world of wonder. This was where Paul showed him how to take apart radios and televisions and put them back together. With each project, Steve learned more than just mechanics. He learned to think like a builder. Steve watched his father work with patience and precision. Paul would say, "Even the parts you can't see should be made well." That idea stayed with Steve for the rest of his life. The garage became their lab, a place of bonding and discovery. Steve didn't just learn how to use tools, he learned how to imagine what didn't exist yet. These humble beginnings laid the foundation for a future filled with invention. While other kids played sports or watched TV, Steve and his father were busy exploring what was possible, right there in the garage. As Steve grew older, school became a challenge, not because he couldn't understand the material, but because he was bored. He was a smart student, but he didn't like being told what to do. He questioned the rules and challenged teachers. If something didn't make sense to him, he wouldn't accept it just because an adult said so. Sometimes this rebellious attitude got him into trouble. He played pranks, argued with teachers, and even got suspended more than once. But behind the mischief was a powerful mind. He didn't want to memorize facts, he wanted to discover the why behind everything. One teacher noticed Steve's potential and gave him extra challenges. Steve thrived when he was pushed to think creatively. This teacher's encouragement helped Steve skip a grade. But even then, he didn't fit in. School couldn't contain his hunger for meaning and innovation. Steve was a rebel, yes, but he was a rebel with vision. Everything began to change in high school. Steve Jobs met someone who would change the course of his life. Steve Wozniak was, as he was called, was a quiet genius. He loved electronics and had been building machines since he was a kid. While Jobs was the visionary, Wozniak was the builder, the engineer. The two Steves were very different, but they clicked instantly. They shared a love of technology, jokes, and dreaming big. Together, they built small devices just for fun. One of their early creations was a blue box that allowed people to make free long-distance phone calls. It was a little mischievous, but it showed them something important. They could invent something and people would want it. This friendship wasn't just about fun, it was about possibility. They had no idea yet, but this partnership would one day revolutionize the world of computers. After high school, Steve Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Oregon. But something didn't feel right. The classes didn't excite him, and the cost was a burden to his working-class parents. After just one semester, he dropped out. However, Steve didn't leave the college completely. He stayed on campus, sleeping on friends' floors and collecting soda bottles to buy food. He wasn't a student anymore, but he sat in on the classes that interested him. One of those was calligraphy. To most people, calligraphy was just fancy writing, but to Steve, it was something more. He saw beauty, balance, and elegance in every curve of every letter. It didn't seem useful at the time, but years later, when he helped design the Macintosh computer, he remembered those calligraphy classes. He made sure that the Mac had beautiful fonts and typography. That decision would help set Apple apart, and it all began with a class he wasn't even supposed to take. In the early 1970s, Steve Jobs was searching not just for a career, but for meaning. He had been experimenting with new ideas, reading spiritual books, and questioning the material world around him. One day, he made a bold decision. He would travel to India to seek deeper truth. He packed a few essentials and set off on a long journey with a friend. The experience was life-changing. He met spiritual teachers, visited temples, and lived in simple villages. In India, Steve saw both the beauty and struggle of life in its rawest form. He walked barefoot, went days without much food, and embraced the quiet power of meditation. When he returned to California months later, he was thinner, calmer, and more focused. He didn't find all the answers, but he had found something important: an appreciation for simplicity, clarity, and inner peace. These ideas would shape his design philosophy and approach to business in the years ahead. Back in California, Steve reconnected with Steve Wozniak. Woz had just built a simple, working personal computer. Steve immediately saw its potential, not just as a hobbyist tool, but as something that could change lives. They got to work in the Jobs family garage. It wasn't fancy. There were no offices, no engineers, no investors, just two young men, some circuit boards, and a dream. They built the Apple I computer piece by piece. Jobs used his marketing skills to convince a local computer store to buy 50 units. They sold them all. It was a small start, but it proved there was a market for personal computers. In 1976, they officially founded Apple Computer, Inc., with the help of a third partner, Ronald Wayne. It all started with a belief: computers shouldn't be giant machines locked in labs. They should be personal, powerful, and available to everyone. After the success of the Apple I, Wozniak began work on an improved version. The result was the Apple II, a machine that was faster, more colorful, and more complete. It came in a plastic case, had a built-in keyboard, and could be used right out of the box. The Apple II launched in 1977 and quickly became a hit. For the first time, families, students, and small businesses could own and use a personal computer. It appeared in schools, science fairs, and homes across America. Apple grew rapidly. Investors poured in money. Steve Jobs, just in his early 20s, became a millionaire. But more than money, he had something even more valuable: momentum. He saw that technology could empower people, and he wanted to push it even further. Apple wasn't just selling computers. It was leading a digital revolution. Steve had a bold new vision: a computer that was not only powerful, but friendly, one that even a child could use. In 1981, he began secretly assembling a team of engineers and designers to create this dream. They worked in a hidden part of Apple and called themselves pirates. This project became the Macintosh. It had a graphical user interface, meaning users could click on pictures and icons instead of typing commands. It also had a mouse, sleek design, and beautiful fonts. In 1984, Apple released the Macintosh with a legendary TV commercial during the Super Bowl. It showed a woman smashing a screen representing conformity, declaring, "1984 won't be like 1984. The ad and the computer became iconic. The Macintosh changed the way people interacted with technology. For Steve, it was proof that computers could be not just tools, but works of art. As Apple expanded, its culture began to change. New managers and executives were hired to help run the growing company. Steve, still young and fiercely passionate, often clashed with them. He had big ideas and high standards. He demanded perfection, worked long hours, and expected others to do the same. Some admired his vision, but others found him difficult to work with. The board of directors started to worry about his leadership style. In 1985, things reached a breaking point. Apple's CEO, John Sculley, a man Steve had helped bring in, turned against him. After a series of internal battles, Steve was removed from his own project, and soon after, he was forced to leave the company he had co-founded. It was a painful moment. He was just 30 years old. The company he helped build had pushed him out. But Steve Jobs wasn't done. In fact, his greatest chapters were still ahead. In 1985, Steve Jobs walked out of Apple, a company he had poured his heart into. At just 30 years old, he had been fired from the very place he had founded. The fall was brutal. Reporters wrote headlines. Friends turned distant. For a while, Steve felt lost, humiliated, and heartbroken. But slowly, something unexpected happened. Without the pressures of running a giant company, Steve began to feel free. Free to imagine, to explore, to build something new from scratch. He once said, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." Instead of giving up, he went back to the beginning, just like the garage days. Only now, he had more experience, more vision, and a deep hunger to prove himself again. Soon after leaving Apple, Steve founded a new company called Next. He gathered a small, talented team and set out to build the most advanced computer in the world, one designed for universities and scientists. The Next computer was a beautiful machine. It had a sleek, black cube design and ran a powerful new operating system. Technologically, it was years ahead of its time. But there was a problem: it was expensive. Too expensive. Schools and institutions were interested, but few could afford it. Sales were slow, and the company struggled to find its place. Still, Steve never gave up. He poured his energy into making the best product possible, believing that one day, it would matter. And he was right. The Next software would one day return, at the very heart of Apple's future. After years of hard work, risk, and experimentation, Pixar partnered with Disney to create a full-length animated movie. In 1995, that movie was released, and it changed everything. It was called Toy Story. Toy Story was the first feature film made entirely with computer animation. But more than that, it had heart, humor, and unforgettable characters like Woody and Buzz Lightyear. Audiences loved it. Critics praised it. It was a worldwide success. Pixar became a household name overnight. Steve Jobs, once seen as a failed tech entrepreneur, was suddenly the visionary behind one of the most groundbreaking films in history. For the first time in years, Steve felt something return: joy. He had helped bring magic to the world again, and this time, through storytelling. While Steve was finding success in business again, his personal life was also changing. In his earlier years, Steve had struggled with relationships and avoided emotional closeness. But now, something was shifting. He reconnected with his biological sister, Mona Simpson, a novelist. They formed a deep and lasting bond. Steve also began to embrace fatherhood. He had a daughter named Lisa, whom he had once denied paternity of when he was younger. Slowly, he began to build a relationship with her and welcomed her into his home. In 1991, Steve married Laureen Powell, and they had 3 children together. His family life helped soften his edges. He began to appreciate moments of quiet, laughter, and connection. Though he remained intense and passionate, Steve was no longer just a businessman or inventor. He was learning to be a father, a husband, and a brother. And soon, his story with Apple was about to come full circle. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in trouble. The company that once led the personal computer revolution was now falling behind. Its products were confusing, its leadership was scattered, and its sales were shrinking. Some even feared Apple might go out of business. At the same time, Steve Jobs was still running Next, quietly building advanced software. Apple, desperate for a new operating system, saw potential in Next's technology. In 1996, Apple bought Next, and with that deal, Steve Jobs returned to the company he had once co-founded and been forced to leave. At first, he was only an advisor, but behind the scenes, his influence began to grow. Apple hadn't just acquired software, it had brought back the mind and spirit of its original visionary. By 1997, Apple officially named Steve Jobs as interim CEO. He wasted no time. The company was bloated, with too many products and not enough direction. Steve made bold moves, canceling unnecessary projects, reducing the number of computers Apple sold, and focusing on just a few high-quality products. He also made a surprising deal with Apple's old rival, Microsoft, to stabilize the company financially. Some people were shocked, but Steve didn't care about old grudges. He cared about the future. With intense focus, he started rebuilding Apple, not just its products, but its culture. He brought back simplicity, creativity, and the idea that technology should be both powerful and beautiful. Apple wasn't just surviving anymore. Under Steve's leadership, it was preparing to shine again. In 1998, Apple introduced a product that would signal its comeback, the iMac. It was unlike anything the world had seen. Most computers were boring and beige. The iMac was colorful, curvy, and transparent. It looked like the future. The iMac wasn't just pretty, it was fast, easy to use, and designed for everyday people. It combined internet access, performance, and beauty into one friendly package. The marketing was bold. The design was revolutionary. The public loved it. Sales soared. Apple was cool again. The iMac showed that Apple wasn't afraid to take risks and that design could matter just as much as technology. For Steve Jobs, it was personal proof. He was back where he belonged, and his vision still had power. As Apple reinvented its products, Steve also reinvented its message. In 1997, he introduced a bold new slogan, "Think Different." The campaign wasn't just about computers. It celebrated creativity, courage, and nonconformity. The ads featured black and white photos of people who changed the world: Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Amelia Earhart, and others. The message was clear: Apple wasn't just a tech company. It was a brand for dreamers, rebels, and creators. Here's to the crazy ones, the ad began. The misfits, the troublemakers, the ones who see things differently. The campaign connected deeply with people. It reminded them of Apple's spirit and why it existed in the first place. Under Steve Jobs, Apple became more than a company. It became a movement. In 2001, Steve Jobs walked onto the stage and pulled a small device from his pocket. 1,000 songs, he said, in your pocket. It was the iPod, a sleek music player that would change the way people listened to music forever. Before the iPod, digital music was messy and complicated. Steve and his team simplified everything. The iPod was small, elegant, and easy to use. With its famous scroll wheel and white earbuds, it quickly became a cultural icon. The iPod wasn't just a gadget, it was a statement. Apple was expanding beyond computers and redefining the digital experience. Millions of people bought iPods. Apple became a leader in music, fashion, and technology all at once. And Steve Jobs had once again taken something complex and made it simple, beautiful, and desirable. As the iPod became a global sensation, Steve Jobs saw the next big challenge: how people got their music. In the early 2000s, downloading music from the internet was often illegal and messy. Piracy was everywhere, and the music industry was struggling to adapt. Jobs had a solution. In 2003, Apple launched the iTunes Store, a simple, legal way to buy and download songs. For 99 cents, users could own their favorite tracks, organized neatly on their computers and iPods. At first, record labels were hesitant, but Jobs convinced them one by one, using his charm, logic, and vision. He promised that people would pay for music if the experience was better than stealing. He was right. iTunes quickly became the largest music retailer in the world. Once again, Steve had disrupted an entire industry, this time, not with hardware, but with a digital ecosystem. In 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and gave one of the most famous tech presentations in history. With a sly smile, he teased the audience. Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products: an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. Then he repeated the phrase, building excitement. Finally, he revealed, these are not 3 separate devices, this is one device. It was the iPhone. The iPhone combined music, calling, web browsing, and more into a single sleek touchscreen device. No buttons, no stylus, just your finger. It looked like science fiction come to life. The crowd went wild. Reporters called it magical. Competitors scrambled to catch up. Steve Jobs had once again redefined a product category, not by making something new, but by making it better than anyone imagined possible. The iPhone wasn't just popular, it was transformational. People no longer needed separate devices for music, photos, email, and maps. With the iPhone, they had a powerful computer in their pocket. It changed how people worked, played, communicated, and navigated the world. It changed industries like photography, gaming, transportation, and even journalism. And it sparked the rise of the mobile-first world. More than just a gadget, the iPhone became a tool of empowerment. Whether you were a student, a businessperson, or an artist, the iPhone gave you the ability to connect, create, and explore from anywhere. Steve Jobs once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe." With the iPhone, he did exactly that. In 2008, Apple took the iPhone to the next level by launching the App Store. For the first time, outside developers could create apps for the iPhone, and people could download them with a tap. At launch, there were just 500 apps. Soon, there were thousands, then millions. From games and calendars to fitness trackers and social networks, there was suddenly an app for everything. It was a game changer. The App Store created a whole new app economy, generating jobs, startups, and innovations all around the world. For users, it meant customization and freedom. For developers, it meant access to millions of customers. For Apple, it meant even deeper loyalty to its ecosystem. Steve Jobs had opened a door that would forever change the way people interacted with technology. In 2010, Steve Jobs introduced yet another groundbreaking product, the iPad. Some people questioned its purpose. Wasn't it just a big iPhone? But Steve had a bigger vision. The iPad was designed to fill the space between a smartphone and a laptop. It was light, fast, and perfect for browsing the web, reading, watching videos, and using apps, all with the same intuitive touch interface. Once again, Apple had created a new category. The iPad became a hit with students, artists, doctors, travelers, and families. It transformed education, design, and entertainment. With the iPad, Steve showed the world that technology didn't have to be complicated or intimidating. It could be inviting, elegant, and deeply personal. It was yet another reminder of his unique genius, to see the future not as it was, but as it could be. In 2003, Steve Jobs received news that would change everything. He had a rare form of pancreatic cancer, an islet cell tumor that, unlike most pancreatic cancers, was potentially treatable. At first, Steve resisted surgery. He hoped diet and alternative treatments would help. But as time passed, he realized he needed medical intervention. He underwent surgery and later a liver transplant, but the disease kept returning. Steve, once the energetic and seemingly unstoppable leader, began to look thinner, quieter. He started taking more time away from work. Even as Apple soared to new heights, Steve was fighting a private battle. Behind the famous keynotes and product launches was a man facing his own mortality with courage and determination. As his illness progressed, Steve became more thoughtful, not just about technology, but about life itself. He spoke at Stanford University's commencement in 2005, delivering one of the most moving speeches of his life. He talked about death, calling it the single best invention of life. He reminded students to follow their hearts, to avoid living someone else's dream, and to live fully before time ran out. Stay hungry, stay foolish, he said, words that became a modern mantra. At Apple, he remained deeply involved, working closely with his teams even as his health declined. He poured his wisdom into new products, mentored future leaders, and simplified Apple's vision down to its purest form: create products that enrich people's lives. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He had become a philosopher of technology and a teacher of purpose. Steve was known for his dramatic presentations, especially his famous phrase, "One more thing." It was a signal that something magical was about to happen. In 2011, at what would be his final public event, he introduced iCloud, a service that allowed users to store their music, photos, and files online, seamlessly syncing across devices. It was the beginning of a new era, computing that followed you everywhere. Though visibly weak, Steve's voice still carried weight. His passion was undimmed. His presence, though quieter, still sparked excitement. It was clear that even near the end, he never stopped inventing the future. That final keynote was his parting gift to the world, one more thing. On October 5, 2011, the world received heartbreaking news. Steve Jobs had passed away at the age of 56. Apple's website displayed a simple photo of Steve with the dates 1955 to 2011. Tributes poured in from around the globe. World leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and millions of ordinary people shared how Steve had touched their lives. They remembered the devices he helped create, but more than that, they remembered the spirit he embodied. Apple stores became makeshift memorials. People left flowers, handwritten notes, and apples with bites taken out of them. The tech world paused. The world grieved. A visionary had gone, but his influence was everywhere, in our pockets, in our homes, and in our minds. Steve Jobs didn't just leave behind iPhones, iPads, or Macs. He left behind a way of thinking. He taught the world to dream big, to care deeply about design and experience, and to believe in the power of simplicity. He believed in merging technology with art, emotion, and purpose. He reminded us that people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Today, Apple continues to innovate, building on the foundation he laid. But Steve's legacy goes beyond any company. It lives in creators, thinkers, rebels, and doers everywhere. He taught us to stay curious, stay bold, and always stay hungry, stay foolish. Steve Jobs was not just a man of technology, he was a man of vision. From a curious boy in a garage to a global icon who transformed entire industries, his journey was marked by bold ideas, painful setbacks, and incredible comebacks. He believed that great products came from the intersection of art and engineering. He demanded excellence, pushed boundaries, and refused to settle for anything less than extraordinary. He made computers personal, music portable, phones smart, and design essential. But perhaps his greatest invention wasn't a device, it was a mindset. A mindset that says creativity matters, simplicity matters, passion matters, that it's okay to be different, that we should follow our intuition, take risks, and never stop asking what's next. Steve Jobs changed the world, not just by imagining the future, but by building it. His story reminds us that even one person, with vision and courage, can leave a mark that lasts far beyond a lifetime.